Hello, in this video, we do two examples where we find the product of a matrix and a column vector. All right, so if we were just looking at this and didn't have any idea of anything else what's going on, it might be sort of tricky. But once you see what's going on, I think it's totally doable. All right, so what we do is start with this. I'm going to start by looking at this matrix. And I'm going to think of it for a moment as having, well, I'll just look at this first row. Okay, I'm going to look at this first row, and what I do is I apply that to the column. Okay, and we do a sort of multiplication, which is actually dot product. So, but we don't have to think too much about that, but that's what it is. And what I do is when I multiply this, I'm actually a certain product called a dot product where I take this first entry 1 and I multiply it by the negative 1. Let me write it down. 1 times negative 1. Okay, so that's this first one times the negative 1 here. Okay, so it's the first entry in the first row times the first entry in the column. And then I go to the next entry in that row, which is a 2, and I multiply by that second entry in the column. And what I do is I add that product. All right, so I had the first entry times the first entry. The first entry in the row times the first entry in the column. That's what I have here. Plus the second entry in the row times the second entry in the column. And I'll even go further and do the next step on that, at least on that part. So this is negative 1 plus 8. Well, might as well write that out too. I was about to do it in my head. I mean, essentially, or most people end up doing these in their head, I would think. Okay, so now let's go on to the second row. Pick a different color. Maybe this sort of, what is that? Reddish something or other. Okay, so I go to the second row and I take the first entry in the second row, multiply by the first entry in the column. And I put this over here, and I'll have 3 times negative 1. Plus, then I go to the second entry in the second row. I don't think that's what I wanted. Okay. Then I go to the second entry in the second row and multiply by the second entry in the column. So what we see is that the first row, when I multiply by that column, gives eventually the first row dotting that column gives that first entry, which is a 7. The second row, when we dot it, gives the second entry, which we'll figure out. Let's see. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. 4 times 4 is 16. And negative 3 plus 16 is 13. And I think that people would just most likely just go right to the answer. You take 1, 2, and dot negative 1, 4. So the first row ends up giving that 7, the entry in the first row of the answer of the product. And then you go to the second row and dot negative 1, 4, and that gives that second entry. Then also there's a bit of, well, how does this all work? There is a little bit more here. See, this is a 2 by 2 matrix. And this column vector could be thought of as a 2 by 1 matrix. Okay, so what does that mean? 2 by 2 means 2 rows and 2 columns. So it's always rows, then columns. And this is 2 rows and 1 columns. Now, it has to be, in order for this to work at all, for things to match up, these guys, these two have to equal each other. Sorry, playing around with these colors here. But these, the touch each other, they're closest to each other, right, or what adjacent, they have to equal each other because of the way we do this dot product. We would have to have two entries, which corresponds to this two rows, and we'd have to have two entries over here, which corresponds to two. Okay, these two entries corresponds to two columns, and this two entries corresponds to two rows, and that's why those have to equal each other. Okay, so sort of wondering whether this color is bright enough. Maybe change it to something brighter. Okay, so let's try the next one. It's the same step. If you already got that one, sort of don't need to do this one, but anyway, just try it out. Okay, so let's go again. All right, so I'm going to start off with the first row, and I'm going to dot that first column. All right, I'll get a bright color. Equals. So I have 1 times 1. I match up the first entries. Plus, then I match up the second two entries and take their product. 2 times 2. Plus, third entry is -1 times 3. Then continue. Okay, so we already did that one. Oh, I can go ahead and write down the answer, actually. Or, oh, I guess I'll show another step here. Okay, so let's see. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. And -1 times 3 is -3. All right. So 1 plus 4 is 5. Minus 3 is 2. Okay, on to the next one. All right, let's try this sort of purple color here. Okay, so I do the 3 times the 1. I'll write it out. 3 times 1 plus the second entry, 5 times second entry, 2. Plus third entry times the third entry, so -2 times 3. I felt like on this situation, my handwriting sort of had a little bit of a breakdown. I mean, so anyway, you do this in your head and you go way faster. So I'm taking my time on this. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, handwriting is sort of important because if you don't get the handwriting, then mistakes sometimes happen. Just read things. So it is, yeah, sometimes things like that matter. Okay. So I'm now simplifying. 3 times 1 is 3. 5 times 2 is 10. And -2 times 3 is -6. All right, I'll do this. 3 plus 10 is 13. Minus 6 is 7. That's that. Okay, now I'm going to also talk about the dimensions of our matrices. Have a little note on that. Let's go back to this purple color here, this fuchsia or something or other. Okay, this matrix has 2 rows and 3 columns. And this column vector has 3 rows and 1 column. And so what we see is that these match. As I said before, the two right next to each other have to match. Now, there's another thing that I didn't say, though, is that these guys match, and our product, which is over here, this 2, 7, our product is going to have dimensions, as we see the product has dimensions 2 rows, 1 column, 2 by 1. Well, that's these numbers, these outside numbers. That's the 2 rows and the 1 column. So that's, and you see the same thing over here. We had 2 rows and 2 columns, and this guy, let's stick with the same color. This guy was 2 by, oh, well, this is a mistake anyway. Sorry, I don't want to redo the video. But this is 2 by 1. Maybe some of you saw that and it bugged you. But anyway, these guys match. And then we have 2 by 1, and this is 2 by 1. Okay, sorry about that, but I think I'm not going to redo the video. I don't want to do that. Okay, well, there we go. So that's multiplication, and there's a bunch of videos on that, I'm sure, on if you look those up. But this is my video, and hopefully I didn't make a big mistake. Okay, so that's all. Thank you.